Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. How do you promote economic development in this city, or anywhere really, when every day brings more bad financial news? My guest today, Seth Pinsky, who as president of the New York City Economic Development Corporation, is supposed to do just that. So, welcome.
Thank you.
And are you doing just that?
We are. We've made amazing progress, even in these very difficult times, and obviously we have to acknowledge, like everyone does, that the times are extremely challenging.
Yeah. Well, I know your major projects, your big projects, all get a lot of attention because they're often very controversial. But you do some other regular projects that don't raise the public ire, right?
Absolutely. We're working across the city. We're doing streetscapes, we're doing parks, projects that people don't hear a lot about, and that's probably as much our fault as anyone else.
Well, it may be good, but you should tell them about those. Tell us what actually is the Economic Development Corporation?
Well, the Economic Development Corporation isn't technically a city agency. It's an independent 501c3, and it is kind of a hodgepodge of functions that have been put together over the years to try to do economic development more efficiently than the city has in the past. We have about 375 employees, and we operate along a number of different business lines. We are responsible for a number of capital projects, about $2.5 billion in capital projects, parks, infrastructure, streetscapes, things like that. We manage property on behalf of the city, about 200 properties across the city.
Do they pay you to do that?
We get property management fees, but we also go out and generate revenue on behalf of the city from these properties by renting them. Many of them are industrial or distribution properties, things like the Brooklyn Army Terminal in Sunset Park, or Hunts Point in the Bronx, which is the largest food distribution center in the Western Hemisphere. We're also responsible for large-scale redevelopments, things like Willets Point, Hunters Point South, some projects that you may have heard of in recent months. We sell property on behalf of the city, surplus property that the city wants to put into productive use. And we also act as advisors to the city, doing things like economic advisory work, strategic advisory work. Why does this industry shrink in the city, and what can we do about that?
So do you get money from the city and state? Where do you get your money?
No, we actually generate our own revenue from our business activities, managing property, selling property, and we're actually a net contributor to the city's budget.
When you're actually developing a large project, say Willets Point, you're not developing it as we know a developer. You then, what do? You work with developers?
Yeah, the model in the Bloomberg administration has tended to be public-private partnerships. So we'll work first with community groups, with other government agencies to try to develop a plan, a framework for development. Sometimes a developer will come to us with an idea, but frequently with a project like Willets Point, it will originate from within the government and the community. And we'll take it through the public review process, and at a certain point, we'll RFP the property, we'll ask for proposals from private developers.
Request for proposals.
Yeah. And then we'll partner with a developer and give the parameters to them.
But is there a master overall plan for the city now? Was that what the Bloomberg, what was that called?
The Plan YC.
Yeah.
Well, that's a 30-year sustainability plan, and it's a kind of a conceptual framework for how we're governing the city and developing the city over the course of the next 30 years.
In what area you want to develop, or what you don't? Or
yeah, and the philosophy.
Not you, but the city.
And it's more the philosophy of development than specific projects, although there are specific projects in it. We want to make sure that the city is sustainable, is greener than it's been, that we want to reduce energy consumption, transit-oriented development, things like that.
So does the City Planning Commission work with you directly?
Yeah, we work very closely.
Isn't it?
Absolutely. We work very closely with all the other city agencies, in particular the economic development agencies, city planning, housing preservation and development. We work with Department of Transportation, parks, the whole spectrum.
The buildings you maintain, though, are not residential.
No, the housing preservation and development will.
So did city planning come to you and say, we want to develop Willets Point?
Well, Willets Point is something that we, working with city planning, have developed a master plan for, again, working with the community. It actually started originally with an idea that came out of outreach sessions in Flushing. and people in the neighborhood said, this is an area which we think borders our community, separates us from other parts of the city, and should be developed. And so that's really where the impetus came from.
But not everybody said that.
No, clearly.
There was clearly a lot of opposition to it,
But I
wasn't
think
it?
the opposition, though, tended not to be to development of Willets Point. The opposition tended to be what the development would look like.
But is the ground there a problem? Some of the
Yeah, the issue with Willets Point, it's 62 acres just east of the new City Field, the Mets' new stadium. And the issue there is twofold. One is that it's a former marsh, and it lies in a floodplain. And so as a result of that, it floods constantly. The second issue is that it was, before it was an industrial neighborhood, which it's been for the last number of decades, it was a coal ash heap. And so there's terrible pollution on the site. And the pollution has actually been leaching into the Flushing River and in turn into Flushing Bay and Long Island Sound for decades. And so our goal really was to clean the site up and then to raise it out of the floodplain so that it could be developed.
Now, when you've got a master plan, and the master plan shows you now where different buildings are going to be and what's going to be?
Well, it's different. It's a zoning. Yeah, it's a zoning map now.
Now, how will you go and find developers for that?
Well, we'll have to issue an RFP, a request for proposals.
Is it going to be for each building or
no,
each zone?
You know, we're still evaluating what the right way to roll this out is. I mean, in this economy in particular, it's challenging to find somebody who can develop all 62 acres at once. But our goal is to develop the whole thing as quickly as possible. We think that it's the right thing for the city. It's the right thing for the community.
And I was thinking, it's not that desirable to have one person develop everything. I mean, what's so great about New York City, or what used to be, was the diversity and the mix of all the buildings and the uses and stuff. And so when we start this massive redevelopment, we sort of get such purified communities that it loses the. I mean, it could be any place. You know, it could be in Minneapolis where you used to live.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would say two things. One is that we agree, and it's certainly possible that in Willets Point it's likely that you'll have more than one developer. I mean, even if you picked one development team, it would have to be a team of developers. Just too massive a project. But the other thing is that it's important to remember that a lot of the great sections of New York were developed as one unit. I mean, a great example of that is Rockefeller Center, which is a number of square blocks in the middle of Midtown.
Yeah, but that's not really as big as it is Willets Point.
No, it's not, but it's an example, and there are other examples across the city.
But it had a single use. I mean, it was office space.
Well, it's office and retail and transportation.
Right. So I understand what you're saying. It's just when 42nd Street was always a controversial one. And they've cleaned out a lot of the stuff, but in a way, maybe they've cleaned out. I can't say they've cleaned out too much because it's still a hubbub and a mess. My husband thinks they cleaned out too much, but anyway. But like Battery Park, it's very pretty, it's lovely, but it could be anywhere. It's not really New York. Well, even the Trump place where I live, Riverside South, the stores and everything look like Battery Park. So that's what I'm afraid that we lose as we do this development.
Well, different eras have different philosophies of development, and we've worked very closely with community groups. We've worked very closely with city planning to make sure that Willets Point and the other neighborhoods that we're developing feel as New York as possible.
Do you design? Who approves the design of the buildings and stuff?
Well, the way that it will work is that we've created zoning envelopes working with city planning, obviously, and then the city council, and the developers will develop within those design envelopes.
And they're free to do, or do people? They have to come back to the. Do they have to come back to the community boards and council?
No, they don't. There will be a disposition process that will involve more input from elected officials. But we really have a fair amount of latitude in terms of what kind of requirements we want to put on developers. And there's always a balancing act. On the one hand, you want to make sure that you get exactly what you want, but on the other hand, you also have to give flexibility because conditions change, especially when you're developing such a large area that's going to take a number of years to build out.
But Queens has a very special quality to it, and Brooklyn has different neighborhoods in Brooklyn. So I hope that you pay it, that we'll all pay attention to trying to keep some of those qualities.
Absolutely.
It would be terrible if we didn't. Are you guys partners in the Atlantic Yards project?
We've been working on Atlantic Yards. Yeah, that the prime agency that's been responsible for Atlantic Yards has been the Empire State Development Corporation, which is a state, the state equivalent of EDC. But we've been very closely involved in that. The mayor and the administration are strongly supportive of the project, and we've agreed to make a contribution to the project and have been involved in the planning.
What kind? You mean financial contribution?
Yeah, the city has committed, along with the state, each to put in about $100 million towards construction of the project.
And what kind of things do we get back for that?
Well, we get a lot in exchange for that. I mean, you've got, first of all, a rail yard, which is suboptimal. I think if you talk to the Long Island Railroad, they would tell you that this has been obsolete for decades. And part of the project would be the redevelopment of that yard to allow them to provide better commuter service. You also get improved infrastructure in the area. You cover over the open rail yard, and you get development on top of it. You get thousands of units of new housing, which Brooklyn desperately needs, including 50% of the rental units to be affordable. I think it's 2,250 units.
And what percentage is rental as opposed to owner occupied?
I forget the exact percentage, but the number is about 2,250 units of affordable housing. You also get the new arena, which people
what about
feel,
the arena? Is your money into that?
Well, people feel differently about arenas and sports stadiums, and I think the way that I think about them is, rather than thinking about them as a place where a sports team plays, it's a place where a business operates. And you're bringing a business into the city that isn't currently in the city, that generates tax revenues, that generates enthusiasm and good publicity for the city. For a place like Brooklyn, it gives it an identity. And so that's the reason why we're supportive of that.
It's always interesting because it's nationwide, I think. It's the political people, and it's not necessarily the politicians, because sometimes they're very opposed to it too. But it's the plan. I don't know who it is. Who is it? It's the mayors of the city. What is it? I think it's a macho thing to have these stadiums and to change them. I know you're in the defense, and you haven't been involved in them for a long time, so we have to say that. And I know you have the job.
No, but I think in fairness.
But why is it that economists and everybody else, people who analyze it and everything else, say that it doesn't return to the city what the city pays?
Well, I think, first of all, it depends on the kind of stadium. For example, if you look at football stadiums, there are 10 games a year in most football stadiums. It's very hard to justify a significant public investment in a football stadium. On the west side, what was different with that stadium, and I know there were people who argued with that too, but was that it was also intended to be used for convention space. Yeah. And so it would be used for more than 10.
It was going to be sited next to Javits.
Exactly.
And then when the plan came in for the Olympics, it was also going to be used in the Olympics.
Exactly, and that was the justification for that. It's very different with a baseball stadium or a basketball arena, which is used 60, 80 times a year, where, especially an arena where you can have concerts. And the economic benefits of that are very different from a football stadium. In addition, I think what you have to look at is, what are we putting in? And the problem with a lot of these stadiums, the reason why the returns are as bad as they are, is because the public sector ends up paying for most of the stadium. In most cities that you go to, the ratio that I've heard is it's 75% public money, 25% private money. In the city with these arenas, the formula is reversed, and in some cases even better than that. The amount that the city is putting in is significantly less. The amount that the state is putting in is significantly less, and that in turn creates better returns for the city.
But there have always been problems. I mean, we've put in a lot of money. I don't remember what it is. Is it 600 million, 800, 900 million? How much money went into the Yankee Stadium?
No, it's about $400 million, but it's important to remember what that $400 million went in for. Right. It didn't go into constructing the stadium. What the $400 million was for, from the city, was new parks, new infrastructure.
The parks aren't in yet.
They're going in, and then some of them have opened, and they're rolling out over the course of the next year.
And the transportation thing, it seemed to me, if it's changed, I don't know, because I'm 8 years late, was basically beneficial to commuters more than to
I don't think that's true. I mean, for example, we're building thousands of new parking spaces in structured garages. That was at the request of the neighborhood, because what people found was that on game days, people were driving around looking for parking.
But isn't there an extension, a rail extension there?
Well, there's a new Metro North station, and that's a Metro North station that will be open 365 days a year.
But who uses it other than people coming to the stadium?
Well, there are lots of people who live in places that are more convenient.
I don't want to give you a hard time, because that's not my nature. But if I don't, then everybody will say, wow, she's so easy with them. But anyway, they do remain controversial, right?
there's controversy, but I think as a general matter, if you look across elected officials, you'll see that there's overwhelming support still for these projects. I mean, the important thing to remember, I'll use Yankee Stadium as an illustration, is that at a time when our economy is clearly challenged, what we've managed to do is we've created 5,000 unionized construction jobs. We've created 1,000 plus permanent jobs, part-time and full-time, at the new stadium, incremental to what was at the old stadium. We've generated hundreds of millions of dollars. The largest private investment in the history of the Bronx is now being made with, I think, with the money to date that's been spent so far, something like 30+% going to Bronx-based companies. And you've also you've taken off of the hands of the city, which is very important, I think gets lost in the discussion.
It's the original deal.
Well, you've taken off of the hands of the city the obligation to maintain the existing stadium, which is tens of millions of dollars. I mean, this is an 80-year-old stadium. A chunk of concrete fell from it and could have killed someone. We no longer have to do maintenance at the new stadium.
Hasn't there been a record of difficulty, though, with the Yankees returning money to the city? What was that about?
There was an audit that was performed by the controller that found that they had underpaid certain amounts, and that's exactly what the controller is there for. And the Yankees, as far as I understand, have paid all amounts that they said were due.
It's always a cozy arrangement, and of course, then with this latest flack about the city's box, didn't help, right? But the boxes are very expensive. The tickets are very expensive. I used to go to the Yankee games when I was a kid with my mother on Ladies' Day. I think it cost us $0.25. And then if we went and bought tickets, what were they, $2.50,
right.
$5? What do they cost now?
Oh, they're
very expensive.
Expensive tickets, but you know, they're also at the new Yankee Stadium, and I don't remember the numbers, but there are tens of thousands of tickets that are, you know, under $40, under $20 at the new Yankee Stadium. There will also be tickets that will be very expensive.
Does the city have any control over the price of the tickets?
No, I mean, the deal that we struck with the Yankees was that the city wasn't going to put any money into the construction of the stadium. The construction of the stadium is financed entirely by payments from the Yankees, which is very different, as I said, from most arrangements for sports stadiums. But in exchange for that, if you're asking a team to put $1 billion+ of their own money into a new stadium, it's hard to say to them, and you can't charge the revenue necessary to cover those costs.
But they're also contributing to the escalating salaries that baseball players make. So, I mean, what's the latest salary that they just have done? Millions of dollars? I mean, that is, so the more, you know, they keep bringing these guys, it's all such a vicious circle. It just, one thing feeds on the other. They have to spend all this, they spend all this money for the, you mentioned for the players, and then they have to, you know, raise some money from the people, so we are still paying those salaries.
Yeah, in an ideal world, everyone would, you know, be able to get in for next to nothing. I pay for all of my tickets. I wish they cost less too.
You also said that there was a cap on football salaries, which is interesting, and it would be nice if we had those in other different places.
We'll have to talk to Major League Baseball about that.
Right. What is the policy with minority and women business owners? Do you have a special policy for that?
We do. We have first of all, we're subject to local laws which require a certain amount of our contracting to go to minority and women-owned businesses. We have a compliance officer within EDC, and there are compliance officers in all of the agencies of the city, and that's certainly something that we're constantly striving for to increase the participation.
What are some of your smaller projects that don't raise the public ire?
Well, you know, we're working on a whole range of projects across the city. One of the areas that we're looking to concentrate on is the maritime uses along the waterfront, especially in Brooklyn and Staten Island. You know, what's interesting is a lot of people think of maritime uses as being dead in the city. They all moved to New Jersey years ago, and the waterfront, you know, is now lying derelict. And in fact, that's not the case. We've had an amazing success. We just finished renegotiating a deal with an auto importer at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal in Sunset Park, which is going to reactivate a major port facility that's been dormant for a number of years. In Staten Island, we reactivated something called the Staten Island Railroad, working with the Port Authority, which is going to take 100,000 truck trips off of the roads of Staten Island every year. And the incredible thing about it is that among the businesses that it supports are the New York Container Terminal, which very quietly now accounts for 15 or 16% of all container lifts in the entirety of New York, of the Port of New York. And that's happening in New York City, not in Elizabeth, not in Newark.
Is there a master plan for the development of the waterfront in Brooklyn, for instance?
We're working right now on what we call our Sunset Park Vision Plan, which is going to act as a master plan for that development. We're working with local.
But that's for an area. So what's Red Hook, for instance, now with IKEA and food and Fairway?
The reason we're focused in particular on Sunset Park is because
the infrastructure.
Well, it's also the city actually owns a significant portion of the waterfront property there, from the Brooklyn Army Terminal north through the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal and Bush Terminal and other properties. In Red Hook, it's a mix of ownership. Some of the piers are controlled by the Port Authority. There's a container terminal up there. There's the Atlantic Basin, where the city leases from the Port Authority, and we're working with the Port Authority to try to reactivate the Atlantic Basin. And then more of the property, when you go south in Red Hook, is privately owned.
And then the west side of Manhattan has all been taken care of with the Hudson Park and Riverside South starting, and the piers. Are you involved in the redevelopment of the piers there?
That's more the state, is the Hudson River Park, the city's input. What we have been working on is an equivalent park on the east side. And we're hoping to break ground next year on that, and that will start in Lower Manhattan and eventually make its way up the east side with bike paths and access to the waterfront, which hasn't existed there in generations. So
do you have anything to do with heliports?
We do. We actually, with the downtown heliport on Wall Street, we recently, the Port Authority for a number of years has run that and wanted to get out of that business, and we reached an agreement to transfer that to a private operator. Through that, have generated significantly more revenue for the city, which we think is a good thing at a time like this.
And what about the piers up in the 40s and 50s, the Port Authority piers? Do they still have them?
Well, we actually control the cruise terminal, the Manhattan cruise terminal. We've expanded it into
more than one pier.
It's 3 piers, sometimes 2 piers, depending on whether there's an event on the 3rd pier. But New York is, I think the last statistic I saw, the 4th largest port of call for cruise traffic.
It dipped for a long time, didn't it? Now it's picked up?
It has picked up, and where we've seen a lot of improvement is in Brooklyn, actually, where we opened a new
the Queen Mary
cruise terminal. Yeah, and in Red Hook on Pier 12. And I think last year there were about 142,000 passengers who came through there.
And is that owned by you, the city?
It's owned by the city. Pier 12 is leased by the city from the Port Authority and operated by EDC, and the Manhattan Cruise Terminal is owned by the city and operated by EDC.
Do you take property by eminent domain? I mean, is that?
We don't have the authority to do that as EDC. The city does. In Willett's Point, that's one of the things that made that project controversial, was that there was a request for the ability to use eminent domain. Now, what we did in Willett's Point was that we actually managed to reach agreements with the owners of north of 50% of the private property in Willett's Point before we even started the project. And we're still negotiating with owners, and our goal, certainly for a number of reasons, is to use as little eminent domain as possible, hopefully no eminent domain at all. Both because it's always better to reach a deal with people, but also, quite frankly, it's very expensive to take property through eminent domain, and it would be a much better business decision on our part.
But it's been said, hasn't it, that the property that you've acquired has been very expensive, above market rate? No, not really.
No, we've managed to acquire the property at roughly what we assumed it would be in the budget. I mean, the challenge that we faced was that we had a city council that was demanding that we acquire a certain amount of property before it finished the review process, and so all of the landowners knew that there was pressure on us. But I think, given all of that, we did a very good job sticking to our budget, and that's what we've done.
So, what do you think these poor financial times? What do you think the effect is going to be on your activities?
Well, it's going to make our work much harder, but it also makes it more important. And we've been in the process of putting together what we see as a 4-part plan for getting us through this and getting us out on the other side a stronger city than we are today.
What kind of plans do you have for permanent jobs? I mean, the stadium jobs, they're part-time usually. They don't get insurance and stuff like that. So what are the plans that provide real sustainable jobs that are?
Well, Willett's Point is a great idea, just to take that as one example. When that is completed, it's a mixed-use community. It has retail jobs. It's going to have a convention center, hotels. and office space as well. And we estimate that will generate, when it's completed, about 6,000 permanent jobs, maybe more than that.
Are you able to put stipulations on that a certain number of people from a community have to be hired, or that used to be?
Yeah, it's not so much the community requirements, but we certainly want to make sure that we're maximizing employment in all of our projects. And again, permanent jobs. Another good example is the work that we're doing on Staten Island. We're working with the Port Authority and the New York Container Terminal on the expansion of that. That's the largest, I believe, the largest private sector employer in Staten Island. Employs over 600 people in very high-paying jobs. We're looking to almost double the size of the New York Container Terminal. The work that we're doing at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal is another example of something that's going to create permanent jobs. Same with Atlantic Basin. And these, a lot of people accuse us of only caring about big companies. These are good distribution, manufacturing, maritime jobs. Hunts Point is another example where we're working with the produce market there, which employs thousands of workers on expanding and improving that facility so that it's like we did with the Fulton Fish Market. It's really a 21st century distribution.
Now, where is the Fulton? The Fulton Fish Market is now at Hunts Point.
Yes, correct.
And you run that?
It's run by a cooperative, but we manage the property.
You manage it.
Yeah.
And has that been a successful move?
It's been a roaring success.
Right.
I think if you spoke to most businesses, they were reluctant to move up there.
They were,
but they're all, I think, really glad to be there. And if only for sanitary purposes. You were selling fish on hot July evenings out on the streets in South Street in Lower Manhattan. Now it's a fully refrigerated building. It's up to 21st century standards. And that's what we're looking to do with the produce market as well.
Do you hire only union people? Is it always union workers that work on the construction?
Well, some of the work we do, some of the work is done by the private sector in partnership with us. I would say the vast majority of the work that is done by us is union work, high-paying jobs.
It's very interesting because people really want to develop things. They want the jobs, they want the nice surroundings, everything else, and yet there's always a very vocal community that is always a struggle. Do you find that if you're working with a community that's a much better way of resolving it and coming out with something?
No question about it. I think, we've tried to do the right thing in the Bloomberg administration for the entirety of the term. I think, though, over the course of these 2 terms, we've learned a lot of lessons. And especially we at EDC have worked very hard to form community task forces and to get community input very early on in the process. There was a project on East 125th Street that just went through the land use review process that for years people had struggled. I think there had been 3 or 4 proposals that came and went, nothing happened. We decided to start from scratch working with the community. We formed a task force. We got it through the land use review process, and work should start on that this year. And that's really the model for how we'd like to go forward.
That's great. Well, we have come to the end of our half hour. So, Seth, I wish you much luck in this near future.
Thank you.
But it sounds like you have a very exciting job, and you're doing very good work, I hope.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.